This is an erasure poem, which means you start with a text and you delete and delete and delete until you're left with an arrangement of words on the page, a form that suits your meaning, and also an arrangement of words which suits your meaning too. So you're very much relying on instinct and happenstance. And the source text for this one was Johannes Kepler's Harmonies of the World, where he talks about the music of the spheres. And this is part one, whale songs. Here consonants augmented, diminished, form as relying on planetary movements, which thing these bulks, the longest, the middling, to follow of themselves, of arcs of single following, as another one another arcs.
So Social Sounds from Wales at Night is for solo voice or instrument and tape, and it's based almost entirely on the song of a single humpback whale, which was shared with me by Patrick Miller, who's a biologist at St. Andrews University. Humpback whale songs can sound a lot like human music in terms of timbre, melody, use of pattern and repetition, and so on. So the center of this piece is actually the human singer or instrumentalist playing an unaltered transcription of this humpback whale song. The tape part, which accompanies the whale song, is made out of the same song, as well as some gray seal, sperm whale, and musician wren songs, which were provided by Thomas Getz, Luke Rendell, and Henrik Brum, respectively. But these songs are also highly processed using a program called Soundhack and Audacity that at first you can't recognize any animal songs within this accompanimental tape part. But gradually, the recording of the humpback whale itself emerges from the tape part and starts to play in duet with the human soloist. The human soloist then goes off into an improvisatory section, which is based on the humpback whale's song style. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about having this piece be for any voice type or any instrument is that each person, partly depending on the instrument and partly depending on their personality as a musician, will pick up on different aspects of the whale's song for their improvisation. And I feel like every musician I've worked with has somehow, their improvisation has sounded true to the whale song, but they've also all sounded very different. Whether they're exploring the timbre of the song, the musical gestures, the expressiveness, or the structure. So I wanted to ask both Alex South and Katherine Wren, who performed this piece. And I first wanted to ask Katherine Wren a little bit about what she was thinking about when she played the improvisatory section of this piece.
Yeah, one of the most moving things for me, I think, about doing Social Sounds was really the act of feeling like you were duetting with the whale. And I guess going into the improvisatory section, I was picking up on some of the sounds that the whale had made and extending those, and I suppose instrumentalizing those sounds and suiting those to my own instruments. So it was my reaction to the sounds that the animal made, and extending those into my own instrument, and I suppose drawing out the character of my instrument. I mean, I'd agree with Emily that each instrument that plays that music brings some of its own character into it, and I think as a viola player I kind of feel that I have a very singing instrument, and an instrument with a really wide range of timbres, and actually that can make noises very similar to the humpback whale. So yeah, that was my kind of main goal in playing that music, I think.
Great, thanks. And what were you thinking about, Alex?
It's been quite a while since I recorded the piece, but as I recall, I was first of all started out by actually building on the percussion, and I mean the percussion is something unusual for me to do, and I found that there were particular pitches within the percussion that worked really well with the sound on the track. So I think my improvisation started out from that, actually, kind of with percussion and then imitating the percussion on the clarinet, and then also getting into the humpback whale melody, as Katherine was mentioning, and playing it in different ways and exploring different timbral possibilities. I think I was singing alongside with playing at one point, and finally also there's towards the end of the improvisation, there's a part where there's some ascending sounds in the processed electronic track, and that also became part of the general movement of the improvisation, just a kind of growing excitement and getting higher and higher on the clarinet.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I didn't mention in my introduction to the piece, but there's also a sort of a fairly minimal percussion part, which is usually played by the singer or instrumentalist. And it starts out with something making ocean sounds, often an ocean drum or a rain stick or something like that, which accompanies the whale song. So now we're going to hear Alex performing this piece.
Electra perivalaris, geese flying over my head and then into the distance, was inspired by the composer's visits to Caer Laverock in Dumfriesshire. During the winter months, the entire population of barnacle geese from Svalbard migrate to this part of Scotland. Electra spent whole days in the presence of these geese, watching them on the ground and in the sky, and recording the sounds that they make. On one occasion, as she was leaving, she noticed a distant shape in the sky, It came closer and closer until the sky above her was filled with geese, and all she could hear was their voices. After they passed over her, they flew away into the distance. The piece is scored for live viola and electronics, and it consists of modified recordings of the birds and of their surroundings, so water and air noises, the sound of the sea on the estuary. And to begin with, the viola produces textural sounds. It uses a technique called circular bowing, where the bow literally moves in circles on the string, which actually makes a kind of more, I suppose, a less focused, more airy sound, which complements the sound of the geese. And then as the music develops, there's a soaring melody that evolves in the solo viola, which to me at any rate is suggestive of flight and the spaciousness of the surroundings. The piece really resonates with me because I spent some time out in Iceland camping by Lagerfjord, which is a huge lake near Aelstaddir in East Iceland. And at that time, the geese were gathering to migrate south. And simultaneously, I was preparing to fly back to Scotland after I'd been resident in Iceland and the Faroe Islands for a month. And yeah, it was a time where I was kind of ready to travel home again. And I kind of felt a sense of kinship with these geese because we were making the same journey south. I live in an area near to Stirling where the geese collect in the fields. So it's always a big event when they fly over us and start taking up their winter residency here. So it was quite something actually just to reflect on both the geese and myself making the journey, myself obviously by mechanised means flying, and just thinking about what that meant, that the birds were actually doing this long journey under their own power.
So one thing that struck me when I listened to the performance, Catherine, was that the geese sounds are used very differently by Electra to the way in which Emily uses the whale sounds, etc., for social sounds. And I was wondering whether you felt differently about learning and performing the piece, given that the sounds, there's much less imitation or kind of obvious imitation of geese sounds. So I was wondering whether that made a difference to you. Also, whether how I mean, just how it feels to be preparing a piece which is based on animal sounds when it's less clear, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say learning geese flying was a very different experience to playing social sounds. I think with social sounds, I kind of felt almost like I was in the water, if you like, with the whales, and very much duetting with the whale and trying to blend my sound with the whale sound. Where in geese flying, yeah, definitely my world as a performer, as a viola player was separate to the geese. I guess at the beginning, actually, with the circular bowing sounds, I kind of felt more integrated into the surrounds there. To me, that kind of feels a bit like the beating of the wings, and maybe feeling myself more in their world. But as the melody evolves, very much feeling like an observer to that scene, very much a human participant, separate from the birds. I suppose exactly what Electra has in the title, the idea of the geese flying over my head. I mean, I kind of picture that scene as I'm playing, that there's a bit at the climax of the piece where the birds take off, this huge beating of wings. So it's almost like a mental reflection of what they're doing, that idea of the music soaring and the birds taking off. And I suppose the world's almost diverging, actually. So, I'm this melodic element reflecting on what they're doing, as opposed to trying to imitate and be part of their world. So, yeah, it's a very different piece to perform.
It seems to me to be some way in which there's also almost a synesthesia going on between the flight, watching the flight and the movement and the lifting up and just being free from gravity, so to speak, and the melody. And I was thinking of the ways that music can work in different ways. So it doesn't have to be. Obviously, if you're not imitating sounds, then there are other ways to create correspondences between animals and the music. And I was, for me, there was something, sort of transference that way. I don't know whether that speaks to how you experience that melody.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, it's quite a high melody on the instrument. There's very few low pitches used in it, actually, and I think the viola in that register has a very distinct timbre. It's quite a kind of melancholy sound, and yeah, definitely that feeling of lightness and airiness that I guess kind of conveys the freedom of flight a little bit as well. So there's definitely some thought into how that melody evolves and how it reflects the animal world, I think, in that.
I just think that's so interesting, the fact that the viola changes personality or empathetic qualities as it moves through different registers. I think that's such an interesting idea. You talked about having a melancholy in the high pitches. Yeah. I wonder how much of that is I don't know, would that be because we does it become more human, or does it become closer to a human voice, or why do you think that is? Maybe it's because it moves away from something that sounds almost human.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think string instruments generally have a very human quality, their ability to sing, and yet at the same time, we obviously don't need to breathe, which is a very unhuman thing, I suppose, that we can spin these long lines. I think part of it is just an instrumental thing, and just the acoustics of that particular instrument, that each string takes on a different character. But I mean, it's an interesting subject, actually, because I wrote a piece myself based on Lagerfjord, the same area that I heard the geese at and saw the geese at, and interestingly enough, I actually tuned the instrument down in that. So I'm really focusing on low textures. Again, using electronics actually in that one, recording myself and then manipulating that sound. And it's much darker texture. So yeah, I don't know whether there's that feeling of that, that music's much more grounded. And I mean, actually listening to a lot of Icelandic music, there is a lot of darkness in the colouring quite often. So I do think there's parallels between the kind of timbres you get and the landscapes and and nature actually, and the way we depict that in music. I think there definitely is a connection. I mean, I don't know whether Alex feels something similar on the clarinet. I'm not sure.
I mean, there's certainly different feelings which are easier to evoke, I think, in different parts of the range of the clarinet. And I suppose the clarinet has a very similar range to the viola, really. And in social sound, certainly, I explore the full range of the instrument. Partly that's just to do with what pictures are around in like written pictures in the score, but also in the improvisatory section, there's this kind of I felt this impulse to just get higher and higher to kind of escape somehow.
Yeah, I think both viola and clarinet, humpback whales also have a very wide range. So I think viola and clarinet are both quite well suited to playing that piece. I know, for example, I've had it played on double bass, which I guess also can go very high, but it doesn't really naturally gravitate towards going up high. And definitely the lower instruments or higher instruments that have played it sort of bring out very different aspects of the song than something that can encompass sort of both ends of it.
Yeah, I think that's something that people are often surprised at, actually, the humpback whale, how high it can sing. People think it's a large animal. It should have a really low voice, and it can sing very low. But it all, as you say, Emily, it can go right up to the very high and top notes on the grand piano and beyond.
Right, which I guess is actually similar to a lot of instruments, like bass clarinet or bass or any of this. I mean, the stringed instruments can keep going up higher, but if you have a high instrument, there, in most cases, there's no way to make it go lower. There are some, sometimes there's very extended techniques which can make an instrument play lower than you might expect, but for the most part, it is the larger ones that have that extended range.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go on.
So no, I was going to say I do think there's an analogy between freedom and pitch rising, isn't there? There does seem to be that idea of a melody taking flight, and just that sense of space you get with the higher pitches.
Yeah. Yeah, just because in so many cases there is not an absolute limit. You could just go that tiny bit higher, whereas with the low note there usually is at some point an absolute limit.
Yeah.
There's something that Roger Payne says about humpback whales, and Roger Payne recorded some of the first humpback whale song that became well known in the West in the 1970s, and he talks about the voice being ethereal and unearthly, which sort of does put it into those realms. I mean, the sounds that he was recording were predominantly high sounds, or contained a large number of those high expressive sounds, or sounds which we hear as expressive. But I don't know. I'm not sure whether I describe them as ethereal. But maybe that goes with freedom. I'm not sure. So the audio part to Cetacea is an unedited improvisation that Katherine and I recorded during 2020. We'd previously talked with Lesley about our overlapping interests in animal song and the cultures of the North Atlantic, and had read her poem Cetacea, itself inspired by an exhibition by artist Marina Rees, centered on the bones of the deep-diving pilot whale. We'd both found much in it to motivate us musically, beginning with the lines unpitched, long low tones degraded by the air. Katherine and I independently chose a few lines from the poem, and decided without much discussion to start out with the pitches A, C, and E, selected from the title of the poem. Nothing else was set. We improvised once, realised we had something quite promising, and played again, recording this second session. By sheer coincidence, our recording is the same length as the longest recorded dive of a long-finned pilot whale. The next step in creating the video piece was the finding of the film My Pilot, Whale, from filmmakers Alexander and Nicole Gratovsky, which had been put up on YouTube with a Creative Commons license. I'd not previously done much video editing, but the astonishing footage of pilot whales shot from close range drew me in, and once I'd done the preparatory work of choosing sequences, the piece felt like it really made itself very quickly. I made one use of one particular effect that appeared to render the whales almost transparent, but otherwise did very little to the clips, other than to assemble them in a way that fitted both the music and a loose narrative structure that took us from the surface down into the depths. The lines from Lesley's poem were introduced at the moments when they'd instigated musical responses, and we decided to add an audio recording of the pilot whales themselves to the start of the piece, and this was supplied by biologist Michael Shear. So this might be a good point to tell you a little more about pilot whales. They are highly social animals living in stable family groups of around a dozen closely related individuals. Recent research by Amy Van Sees and colleagues has begun to confirm what has been long suspected, that social units possess their own dialects of calls that may serve to maintain segregation among different groups. If, as it seems likely, such dialects are passed on by social learning, this means that pilot whales can join a number of other cetaceans that have been described by biologists as possessing a culture, community-wide behaviours that are learnt by one animal from another. was just wanting to know a little bit more about the practicalities of writing the poem, and were you at in the museum with the bones of the pilot whale in the installation, or how did it all come about?
Oh, I had a writing residency up in the north of Iceland at Skagastrond, and it was in December 2016. And I went round to Husavik on the bus to the Whale Museum, and there was hardly anybody there because it was December, and I had the place to myself for 2 afternoons, and there was just myself and all these beautiful, beautiful reconstructions of whale skeletons that they had suspended from the ceiling, and they had lit from the bottom, and you walked through them through the museum, which was astonishing. And at the same time, in part of the museum, they had Marina Reese's exhibition there, and the sound that she had as part of her exhibition, it echoed through the building as well. And it was an otherworldly experience altogether, but it really it made me think very much about how what we can say about these things is only a tiny, tiny, tiny fragment of what there is to be said, and how incomplete our language is. So when I went to, when I was reading, they had a lovely library there, and when I was reading through texts on this, I thought the only way really I'm not the person to invent this idea, I have to say, but the only way to talk about this is to not talk about it in a sense. You can point with language, but language is so inadequate to the experience that another species might have of their world and how they express themselves, that it's a foolish, vain thing to do, to think that you can encapsulate that in sentences. And so that was why I used phrases from the things that I read, but I broke them up just to indicate that the gaps are at least as important, or more important possibly, than the tiny fragments you retain. So, and that also mirrored these whales being suspended from the ceiling of this old whaling shed, which was now the museum, in darkness. So.
One of the things that's really, apparent both in hearing the piece, but especially in hearing sort of your introduction to it, Alex, is just thinking about how sort of interdisciplinary and collaborative that single, now it's a single piece that, somebody could watch it, but yet there's two musicians, a poet, the artist, the filmmakers, the scientific research, and the whales themselves that are part of it. And I think you could say that you're all, in a sense, equally collaborators in creating this piece. Like the piece would not exist, or at least it would not exist as it is without any one of those parts, and many other parts as well. But that sort of brings me to the question, which I know I've thought about in my own music, which often is based on animal songs, and I know Alex thinks about as well. But just the question of what does it mean to have another species as a collaborator in your piece? Because obviously, if I'm working with the three of you, we can talk about what we're doing and, how we want our music to be used, or what sounds right, or what we want to do together. But with the whale, we have the music. In some cases, we have the skeletons or the videos or whatever. We have the sounds, but we can't ask the whale what it thinks about this collaboration. So I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts on that. And this is not a trick question. I don't have an answer. It's something I think about a lot, but I want to know other people's thoughts.
I think it's very important to be respectful to the animal, first and foremost. I mean, as you say, we can't know what the thought processes of that animal are as it's making those sounds. We have no way of knowing what it would think, I suppose, of us doing that. And I think for me, it's not trying to be the whale. It's sure, I might mimic the sound of the whale, but it's hard to explain. But it's wanting to be close to that animal and wanting to understand the sounds it makes, while still being respectful of the fact that it has its own world and it has its own language that I can never know either. But yeah, I suppose to bring that out into the world and to make something beautiful of it, and to integrate it into something human that hopefully other people can relate to, that might then make them interested in that animal and in its world. And I think a lot of the importance for me behind a lot of the art that I do, environmental art that I do, is to make people aware of the beauty, I think, actually, of these creatures and these landscapes, and to therefore consider them and to respect them, and by so doing to treat them better. I don't know whether that's idealistic, but you know, I mean, I think art that agonizes over what mankind's doing to the world has a role too. But I think equally, to avoid alienating people sometimes, or making that too big a thing, you know, almost a despairing thing of, you know, what can we do about it? There's nothing we can do about it. Instead of to turn that on its head and to make people think that, look, this is something really special. These are special creatures with, you know, they're sentient beings, and you know, to really connect with that and to want to preserve the places they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had a thought there when you started, Catherine, talking about ethics and or feeling respectful towards the animals. And this chimes with some reading I've been doing recently from Donna Haraway, and she talks about responsibility, but as responsibility. So the way that works of art can help us to respond, to give us the ability to respond to the kind of some of the awful things that are happening in the world today. And I think, you know, as artists, musicians, we can do that, and it helps us somehow reach out to other people, as you said as well. You know, it's not only about the way that playing pieces based on animal song or making pieces based on animal song helps us as musicians or poets or composers to get in touch with the animal somehow, to form some kind of relation. It's also to act in some sort of mediating role with other people, and I think that's really important.
I think you can also use your art, whether it's language through poetry or any form of writing, or through music or anything at all. You can also use it to point to what's not there. You know, you can use the conventions and the habits and the structures that are well rehearsed and well practiced within your own art medium to you can use them disruptively to point to, you know, what is beyond framing. And although it's very easy to say, to take an ethical stance and say these are precious, these are beautiful, you can also take that stance through your art and say these are just inexplicable, and these are just unwordable, and these are just, you know, so strange and other to our experience. And that is what you need to be in awe of, and to be respectful towards the fact that, you know, it's a failure of imagination and a very conceited thing to think you can quantify and describe and explain, when, you know, so much of you know, what is there that you're responding to as a human being, you know, so much of the elements that you're grasping, you might be entirely misinterpreting, or they're valuable to you or meaningful to you because they chime with something within your human imagination, but there's so much beyond that. Perhaps the only way to point to that in a very inefficient way is just to disrupt language, or to use disruptive or unexpected conventions in music.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like something that's coming through a little bit in what both of you said, Lesley and Catherine, like just that to sort of understand another species, or to come closer to understanding them, you have to make lots of room for the things you don't understand. Like if you think you can totally understand what they're thinking or feeling or doing, then you're clearly misunderstanding it. And it's only when you leave a lot of space for mystery that you can maybe have more of a glimpse of what it might be like to be them.
Woo as in wound, ha as in hunt, ah as in raft, ill as in full, as in breach. Woo as in fluke. Ha as in tongue. Ah as in abe. As in oil. As in jaw. Woo as in run. Ha as in calf. Ah as in eye. As in blow. As in breath. Woo as in bow. Ha as in tump. Ah as in slight. As in blink. As in swell. Woo as in sound. Ha as in hull. Ah as in wash. As in shelve. As in dive.